Planes have airdropped boxes of aid into Rafah and Khan Yunis, where hundreds of Palestinians gathered to try and get the supplies they desperately need. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to talk peace and the return of prisoners of war from Russia. Planes have airdropped boxes of aid into Rafah and Khan Yunis, where hundreds of Palestinians gathered to try and get some of the assistance falling from the sky over the Gaza Strip. Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and France airdropped tons of humanitarian aid. It would normally go through the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. Where there is food to be had, it's 2 spoonsful per person. That's what is being handed out by social organisations trying to help the hundreds of displaced families who fled Gaza's north. A month ago, the International Court of Justice demanded that Israel take the necessary steps to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. But according to a number of agencies, including UNICEF, the Red Cross and Oxfam, the situation has only worsened. At the latest session of the UN Security Council, the focus was on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. During the discussions, 2 human rights groups accused Israel of continuing to block aid despite the ICJ ruling. Amnesty International says the number of aid trucks have also decreased by 1/3.
Thank you for convening today's debate.
As work continues on trying to get a ceasefire agreed, the Israeli military says its combat soldiers have been operating in Gaza City's Zaytun area in the northern Gaza Strip over the last week. They said they had encountered terrorists and located weapons. Meanwhile, both Hamas and Israel have poured cold water on US President Joe Biden's hopes of a truce by Monday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday for talks with the kingdom's powerful crown prince as the Ukrainian leader pushes for a peace plan and the return of prisoners of war from Russia. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has sought to position himself as a potential mediator, even as Riyadh remains closely aligned with Russia on energy policies. Zelensky is headed for Albania next. Zelensky's trip comes as Kyiv's forces are slowly being pushed back in eastern Ukraine. Within the Zaporizhia region, the Ukrainian army is striving to push back advancing Russian forces despite facing an ammunition shortage. Each day, Russian troops make slight advancements. A new defensive line has been created in just a few days. 3 kilometers from the front, the Ukrainians have set up dragon's teeth to stop the Russian tanks. Ukrainian forces claim to have shot down a Russian Su-34 fighter jet on the eastern front. It would be a rare plus for Ukraine if this was confirmed. Ukraine is expected to remain short of ammunition and on the back foot in its war with Russia for several months until the West sorts out further support. President Joe Biden and Donald Trump have won their respective Democrat and Republican primaries in Michigan, but uncommitted votes are a concern for Biden. Grassroots organizations urge Democrats and Arab Americans to send Biden the message, no ceasefire, no vote, over the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump claimed a 5th consecutive victory over rival Nikki Haley. It means the pair are on course for a rematch in this year's presidential election.
Following French President Emmanuel Macron's statement that sending NATO troops to Ukraine should not be ruled out, the Kremlin has said such a move would inevitably lead to a conflict with Russia. Macron was speaking at a meeting of Western leaders in Paris. The response of Vladimir Putin's press secretary was unambiguous.
Это, конечно, абсолютно не в интересах этих стран, они должны отдавать себе в этом отчет. В этом случае уже нужно говорить не о вероятности, а о неизбежности.
Macron's allies also poured cold water on the idea. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that NATO soldiers would be redeployed from active service to Ukraine, a view echoed by the alliance's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. Despite apparent divisions on this issue, the military bloc has been united in welcoming Sweden into its ranks after the Hungarian parliament finally gave its approval. It gives the West a strategic dominance in the Baltic region.
A veteran human rights campaigner has been sentenced to 2.5 years in prison by a Russian court for discrediting the country's armed forces. Oleg Orlov, who's 70, was a leader of the group Memorial, which jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022, a year after it was banned and dissolved in Russia. Orlov was convicted of denigrating the military in an article in the French magazine Mediapart. The story also criticised the war in Ukraine.
More environmental crimes will be punished across the EU. The European Parliament approved Tuesday a revised directive on the protection of the environment through criminal law that updates the list to include illegal timber trade, depletion of water resources, and substantial damage to an ecosystem. Breaches of EU chemicals legislation will also be criminalized, explains Rapporteur Manders, punishing companies for dumping polluting substances.
I think we have to stop these behaviors just to make extra money. They pollute or make people sick, and I think that's a crime, I think. So it's good that we introduce this now as a minimum harmonized criminal law in Europe. And even it's possible to take CEOs responsible if the company is misbehaving.
The directive aims to establish uniform sanctions for environmental crimes across the EU, with companies to be fined up to 5% of their annual worldwide turnover and imposing up to 10 years of imprisonment for individuals.
10 years is when a behavior is killing people, so it's an environmental crime with death, which causes death, and that's actually murder. And then they get 10 years, and that's if they do it. Let's say intentionally, just to make money.
The law was approved with the support of almost all the political groups of the chamber. It must enter into force in all member states within 2 years from its formal adoption. Thousands of farmers protested in the center of Warsaw on Tuesday against European Union agriculture policies and imports of cheap food from neighboring Ukraine. Protesters are also demanding for the Polish government to withdraw from the EU's Green Deal, which is designed to combat climate change with measures that include reducing the use of pesticides. About 30,000 people took part in the protest.
Nie będzie zgody na to, żeby jakaś lewacka ideologia zabraniała nam hodowli zwierząt, uprawy naszej ziemi. Nie możemy się poddać tej chorej ideologii, która nam narzuca, co mamy robić, a czego nie.
In Catalonia, Spain, farmers blocked the main motorway link to France. Protesters emptied several trucks of Moroccan-made fruit and vegetables on the road. Throughout the day, traffic jams were visible on several roads near the border.
Taxi drivers in Athens have begun a 48-hour strike in Athens. They're calling for lower taxes, access to bus lanes, and stricter regulation of ride-sharing apps. The action will coincide on Wednesday with a general strike by public and some private sector workers that is expected to disrupt public transport to the Greek capital, ferries, and airports. It will also coincide with the first anniversary of a railway disaster that killed 60 people and injured dozens, the deadliest the country has experienced.
German authorities say a former member of the disbanded left-wing militant Red Army faction group has been arrested after more than 30 years on the run. Prosecutors in the northern town of Verdun confirmed the arrest of 65-year-old Daniela Klette in an apartment in Berlin. Klette is one of 3 former Red Army faction members whom police have been seeking for years. They've also been linked to at least 12 robberies in northern Germany between 1999 and 2016 and were sought for attempted murder. A German far-right extremist already serving a life sentence has been convicted of hostage-taking in the course of a jailbreak attempt. Stephen Balliet was sentenced to 7 years in prison. During the trial, the defendant acknowledged that in December 2022, he took prison officers in the eastern town of Berg hostage using a homemade weapon in an attempt to escape. Balliet was sentenced to life in prison in 2020 for his attack on a synagogue in Halle in central Germany the previous year, in which he killed 2 people.
Italian MEP Alessandra Mussolini, granddaughter of the dictator Benito Mussolini, claims to have been attacked in Strasburg on Monday in a video she posted on her X account. She alleges that she was verbally and physically assaulted.
Stavamo al centro, buio, tra l'altro io non è che stavo in un gruppo di facinorosi, mi ha riconosciuto, c'è stato l'insulto, questa aggressione, poi ringraziando Dio i miei assistenti siamo andati via perché poi non sai mai se hanno qualcosa in mano. Non ci devono essere condizionamenti. Dobbiamo essere libere di fare le nostre attività, le nostre cose, girare per strada tranquillamente, non farci mai condizionare. Dovrò fare più palestra.
Mussolini maintains that she does not wish to press charges, but posted on her social media later thanking her followers for their solidarity. She was elected into the European Parliament in 2014.